latest Remnant Fly today that I'm tying, and this is more or less a freestyle wet fly. Started out looking through my gear. By the way, if you don't know what a Remnant Fly is, there's a link in the description down below of why they are called Remnant Flies and where this comes from. Basically just a bunch of leftover material that I've accumulated over the years doing different classes and different things that are good for flies, but really don't have any specific purpose. I mean, I certainly could dig through them if I had a particular need to, but instead I put them all together in a box, call it my remnant stuff, and I just make kind of free form flies out of it. So today's is kind of a freestyle wet fly. It started out by looking at this yarn, thinking that this stuff would make, a good body material for a fly, a wet fly or something, and then started thinking about ribs, and then started thinking about wings and throats and hackles and so on. And then it kind of evolved into looking at some mallard flank here that I thought would make a good wing. And then I ran across some tinsel, and I thought I hadn't done any freestyle stuff with tinsel and like an oval rib and everything. So this is how it evolved, and I think it's going to be an interesting little baitfish fly. I'm looking forward to swinging this one later on this summer and this fall. So that's the latest Remnant Fly, kind of a freestyle wet fly. I'll get started tying. All right, I'm going to start the Remnant Fly here with my hook in the vise. I'm pretty certain this is a 3399 number 4. Could possibly be a number 2 3906B. Heavy wire hook. It looks like a standard wet fly hook. That's what I'm going to get started with here. This fly came about, as I mentioned before, is kind of developed as a wet fly. In the end, usually I start with a hook on these and then kind of decide something as I pick out a hook, whether it's a streamer hook, a nymph hook, or a dry fly hook or something like that. This one started a little bit different. Started with the tail material, but that's what we're going to do here, is just kind of a freestyle wet fly. I'm going to debarb the hook. For thread, I'm using a black Danville 6/0 because I don't have to worry about darkening up any of the body on this. We're going to have a silver tinsel body and a oval silver tinsel rib. I'm going to run my thread down to just past the point of the hook. I'm going to tie in my tail. I'm not going to put a tip on this or a tag. It does have a tail. This is kind of how it got started. I looked at this red yarn and I thought about, doing this as like the body material. But then as I got into looking at some silver tinsel and everything, I decided that I'd rather do this as a tail and do a tinsel and oval tinsel rib body. So there's 3 strands in here. I'm going to peel out one of them. And actually, I'm going to peel out 2 of them, because this is a larger size hook. Now, because I'm doing the tinsel body on this, I have to be careful that I do not get any bumps or anything in here. So I'm going to tie this in. I'm going to tie it long. I'm going to bring my thread here for the tail all the way back, kind of stretching this yarn out right here. I want to make certain that this gets all the way back to the end of the shank, because now I'm going to tie in the rib, and the rib is a oval silver tinsel. And I'm going to say this is probably a medium size, not a large. I'd say it's probably a medium size. This I'm going to tie in so that it is just about the length of the body. The yarn, as I advance forward, binding all this in, that yarn's going to kind of squish down and stretch and push out. So I'm going to leave it a little long so as I get close to it up here, I can trim the excess off. And I have a nice, smooth, tapered body. The body is going to be made from some Mylar tinsel. This is a size 12 Danville silver gold Mylar tinsel. I'm going to tie this in with the gold side up so that it will flip over to the silver side. Again, bringing that back the length of the body. I suppose I could actually tie this in at the tip and then run that Mylar down and back to get a double layer. Might not be a bad idea. Keep that in mind if you're going to tie this fly or something similar to it. That's always an option. If you're not overlapping and or getting touching turns and some of that black thread shows through, you can always instead tie that Mylar tinsel in right up here at the head and then advance it down and back for a double layer. But we're going to try it single right now, so I want to make certain I'm covering up any thread wraps with that first wrap there. And then I'll start to open this up enough. I'm going to overlap just a little bit, which isn't really going to hurt. So I want to make certain I'm covering up any of the thread wraps underneath. This little bit right here, because I've got, probably should have trimmed that yarn at an angle, giving myself a little bit of a taper. Not really that concerned because my wing at Hackle will cover all of that up. But another thing to keep in mind, remember that's the thing about the remnant flies. These are just made out of remnants that I have around. And I have not done this before, although I've done other flies like it. So I don't always know the best way to basically accomplish what I'm looking for. Whereas if I tied up a dozen of these, I'd probably figure out the best way. So we'll wrap up our rib, 5 even spaced wraps. Sixth one comes right up near the head space. Oops, I just broke my thread. So I'm going to attach my hackle pliers to that tinsel, keep some tension on it. Fortunately, I didn't pop my thread back in the bobbin, so I don't have to rethread it. I think what happened was as I brought that tinsel around here, I pulled too hard on the thread. This tinsel, this oval gold tinsel, is actually a metal tinsel. And if you pull too hard on it, that metal at the right angle will just pop your thread real easy. Show you something here real quick. When I was detaching my hackle pliers, which were there to keep tension on this while I was rethreading the bobbin and getting it reattached. As I was taking the hackle pliers off, it grabbed the end of that tinsel. And see, this is what I mean. This is basically a solid core, and the tinsel here is just wrapped around it. So you can't really slide your thread over it or anything. But this right here, this part here, is metal. That's not a Mylar plastic. That's actual metal right there. So a little something extra for our video today. So I'll neaten this up a little bit, clean that up. I'm going to tie in a wing, and I'm not going to do a throat. What I am going to do is a palmered hackle. Before I do the wing, I'm going to trim my tail. I'm going to want the tail to be about half a shank length long. Now remember, because this is stretched here, I'm going to kind of bounce back a little bit. So if I wanted about a half a shank, I go a little bit longer so it'll bounce back. Use my bodkin to tease that all out. So I have a nice full tail. Excuse me. I seem to have launched my whip finish tool across the room when I grabbed my bobbin there. So for a wing on this, I'm going to use some mallard flank. I've already prepped this and got the fluff off of it. I got some of the finer barbs here I still want to take out. They're not going to add anything to the wing for me. So I'm going to take those out. I'm going to clip the center out here, probably about halfway down, like this. And then it's a larger size hook, so I want this a little fuller. I'm going to fold those in together, get myself kind of a nice full wing. Set those up on top. I'm going to put the wing in so they're maybe about halfway down the tail. Get that bound in. We can take a look, see how our wing looks. That looks good to me. Trim away the excess. And then cover up all the butt ends there, clean this up and smooth it off for our hackle. The hackle, I'm going to use a Schlappen. A lot of times when I am tying wet flies and I use Schlappen for the throats, you're constantly pulling off slips, to make the throat for flies. You end up with these little tip sections like this. There's just not much to it. I like to save them for this reason, because they work great for just a little collared in hackle on these wet flies. You don't need a whole lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate the tip out like this. I only need maybe about 3 or 4 turns. A little bit more. Isolate the tip out here. I'm going to tie the tip in right here and put in a couple wraps working backwards. Fold this over, put in a couple more wraps working backwards, and then cover it up, moving my thread up to behind the eye of the hook. This way I can just take this tip, pop that off. Now I'll wrap this hackle in 2 or 3 wraps. I don't have to start way back at the back of the head there. Maybe a little further forward, it'll get covered up. Because I'm going to want to end this right up here by the eye of the hook, like this. Probably could have made that head a little shorter too. Tied in that wing a little bit closer to the eye. See, my last wrap's right there by the eye of the hook. I can bind that in with one wrap, keeping thread tension here. I can fold that rachis back, and I can start the head of the fly going backwards. Once I get a little bit, about half the head space I want, I can then pop that rachis off and then keep working backwards just a little bit to shape the head of the fly. Now I'll flatten my thread. Put in a whip finish. Usually I'll cut my thread off, but this time I decided to break it off. Now let me cut it. Here we go. A little bit of head cement on both sides here. As you can see by my snapping my thread, I kind of goofed up the head of the fly on this. Good example of how every fly you tie does not turn out perfect. So I'll come back in a minute and start putting some lacquer on that. But there's a Freestyle wet fly, which actually I think will be pretty good. Tail might be a little bit shorter. That will actually straighten out and pulse a little bit in the water here, but I like the wing. It's got some nice contrast to it, and the red hackles around that. So that is the latest Remnant Fly. We'll call this one just a Freestyle wet Remnant Fly. Thanks for watching today.
Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.